Good evening. Welcome to the Billy Wilder Theater, home of the public programs for the UCLA Film and Television Archive. My name is May HaDuong, and I am the director of the archive. Welcome to tonight's screening of Free Chol Soo Lee. Before we begin, as a land-grant institution, the Film and Television Archive at UCLA would like to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino and Tongva peoples. We are humbled to do work in this community. The UCLA Film and Television Archive is founded on the conviction that moving images are a vital record of shared cultural heritage and human history. There is tremendous responsibility in this collective work. And so, though I stand here representing the Film and Television Archive as one, I really represent the voices and efforts of many. So we want to thank the Asian American Studies Center, our excellent partners on this program, including Kirn, its director, and their fantastic staff, including Meg Thornton. We're grateful to Charlene, Tonai, Jennifer Chen, and filmmaker Julie Ha, who helped shape this evening's program. I also want to thank the Hollywood Foreign Press Association for funding this program, part of the Making Waves series, which centers BIPOC filmmakers and their work. All of the archive screenings in the Wilder are free, thanks to a gift from an anonymous donor, and we're grateful to them for their support and to the Hammer Museum for their partnership. We thank the UCLA Documentary Film Legal Clinic, the UCLA Asian American Studies Department, the UCLA Korean American Student Association, the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs, and I'm going to say UCLA again, and the UCLA Nikkei Student Union for spreading the word about this important event. Please give these tremendous individuals, organizations, and all our supporters a round of applause. Partnerships are at the core of the archive's efforts, and I'm honored that the archive has worked closely with the ethnic studies centers on campus here at UCLA. Next month, we will partner with the American Indian Studies Center on a contemporary survey of Indigenous filmmaking with Imagining Indigenous Cinema, New Voices, New Visions. The 9-night program launches in June and features dozens of films and many programs with filmmakers present. Screenings are free, and they'll take place here at the Billy Wilder Theater and also across town at the Vidiots Theater in Eagle Rock. Please visit cinema.ucla.edu for that fantastic lineup. Before we begin tonight's feature presentation, the archive will share a special short made by UCLA alumni and student filmmakers as part of our See the Bigger Picture series. We produce See the Bigger Picture to present unique stories that expand the view into the regenerative role of the archive. Tonight's short episode features UCLA Distinguished Professor and art historian Chan Noriega, who reflects on the power of preserving an orphaned and landmark television series, Reflexiones, through the archive's partnership with the Chicano Studies Research Center. And now for the reason why we are here. Tonight, I'm honored that the Film and Television Archive has partnered with the Asian American Studies Center to screen Julie Ha and Eugene Yee's moving documentary about injustice, the carceral system, and an Asian American movement. Free Chol Soo Lee is bound to evoke strong feelings. The documentary contains multitudes, and at times it's shocking and disheartening, but the film is really anchored in the radical belief that justice is possible. Tonight's program brings together incredible speakers in a panel following the screening to reflect on the impact of Chol Soo Lee and the movement that sprung from his unjust and racist conviction. Tonight's panel, moderated by Charlene, Tonai, the external vice president for the UCLA Nikkei Student Union, and features filmmakers Julie Ha and Eugene Yee, as well as Mike Suzuki, who assisted the Chol Soo Lee legal defense team, Kirn Kim, a former incarceree, J. Lee Wong, founding member of the Chol Soo Lee Defense Committee, and Benjamin Kang, advisor for the UCLA Korean American Student Association. We brought this group together really because we wanted to talk about the impact not just of the film, but as it stands in this contemporary moment. So we're really excited to convene it and hope that you will participate and join in the Q&A as well. Before we begin the program, I'm pleased to be joined by Professor and Vice Provost David Yu to say a few words. Dr. Yu is a social historian of the United States and the lead editor for the Oxford Handbook of Asian American History. He is the author and editor of 8 books, including Contentious Spirits, Religion in Korean American History, 1903 to 1945. Since 2016, Dr. Yu has served as the Vice Provost of the Institute of American Cultures, the central hub to 4 ethnic study centers on campus, including the Asian American Studies Center. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Yu to the stage.
Good evening. Thanks, May, and wanted to really appreciate the partnership that we have with the Film and Television Archive, and also thank you for thanking all those other groups so I don't have to do that. And I'm really here on behalf of the Asian American Studies Center to welcome all of you to today's event. The event today and the film screening is something that I think is really important. I am a historian, Asian American historian, and so I think it is important historically, but it also for me is in some ways personal. I got to know Chol Soo Lee towards the end of his life. And we often would speak by phone. He was living in San Francisco and I was here in Los Angeles. And during those last few years, we would have these conversations. And as part of that, we were very fortunate about 10 years ago in 2013 to commemorate the 30th anniversary of his release. We did an event here in West LA, which was probably one of his last public events. And we did that here in West LA, and he was able to be there along with K.W. Lee, who you'll obviously see in the film. And it was a really great experience to be able to do that. But in those conversations that he and I would have, there was a consistent through line in those conversations. It was really that he wanted people to know about his story. He wanted to tell his story, and he especially wanted young people to hear that story. And so I think it's really fitting that this documentary film, this really great film, is really an extension of doing that, telling Chol Soo Lee's story. And so I'm really grateful that the filmmakers and their team have really done this project. We were having dinner earlier, and it was really great to be able to hear more aspects about the film. And so I think that his story is really important on so many levels. And I think what's inspiring is that this film will hopefully really get that story out. As somebody who teaches Asian American Studies, and I've been doing that for about the last 25 or 30 years, I would say that Chol Soo Lee's story is not really that well known, even within those of us who do Asian American Studies. And so I'm really glad to be part of this program. And really my hope is that his story really will get a much wider hearing and viewing, and so that the legacy of what he experienced. And I think what really came through for those conversations as well was his ability to survive and the resilience that he had in the face of such tremendous adversity and injustice. And I think that the tones of our conversation, what I was really amazed by with all the things that he went through, the tone really was still hopeful for what the future could hold. So I hope that I'm really glad that this film is part of that effort to tell his story. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for spending your evening here with us tonight. There are obviously many places you could be, so it really means so much that you chose to be here with us. We have often spoken of this film as a 6-year labor of love. The movement to free Chol Soo itself also took 6 years, and we've always found a tremendous amount of meaning in that rhyme. We have a few thank yous as well, so we hope you'll indulge us in these. Of course, thank you to May and David, Karen Umamoto, who couldn't be here today, Meg Thornton, and Amanda Salazar as well, the UCLA Asian American Studies Center, and the UCLA Film and Television Archive for organizing this. It's just such a thrill to be here. And we're just so honored to be here with you. And also just want to thank our panelists again, Jay, Mike, Kim, Benjamin, and our moderator, Charlene and Kirn. You will they're all extraordinary people, and I hope you'll get to I'm just so happy that you'll get to hear them speak about their experiences. They're just extraordinary. So thank you so much to all of you as well. And we also want to extend our thanks to the UCLA Documentary Film Legal Clinic, which volunteered so much which did so much work on behalf of our film as well. The Nikkei Student Union, the Korean American Student Association, the UCLA Asian American Studies Department, and the Luskin School of Public Affairs. Thank you.
This is an extra special screening for us, and not just because I'm a Bruin, class of 1994. I feel indebted, actually, to the Asian American Studies Center for helping grow my consciousness. There's so many ties, actually, between the Free Chol Soo Lee story and UCLA. The Asian American Studies Center supported Chol Soo Lee himself and tried to make sure this history would not be forgotten through its sponsored symposium, issues of Amerasia Journal that highlighted the Free Chol Soo Lee movement. Former Asian American Studies grad student Richard Kim, who's here, edited Chol Soo Lee's prison memoir, which is available on Amazon.com. We highly recommend reading it. The center's enduring support of journalist and community leader K.W. Lee, who's featured in the film. The former MA student Derek Lim wrote his master's thesis on the Free Chol Soo Lee movement while he was here. I believe activist J. Lee Wong, who's going to join us on the panel, used to work for the center. And activist Warren Tonai used to teach Asian American Studies classes. And even with the Free Chol Soo Lee film, the center provided early and very important funding support. Thank you, David Yu, Jerry Kang. I mean, when you're an independent film, getting that early support when you don't have very much is really crucial. So thank you so much for believing in us. And thank you, Russell Leong. I think he might have been the first one to mention the project to David. The center's generous sharing of resources too, in terms of footage and photos to our film. We really appreciate that. And as Eugene mentioned, the invaluable pro bono legal help that the UCLA Documentary Film Legal Clinic provided to Free Chol Soo Lee. Thank you, Dan Maeda. It's also worth noting that some 45 years ago, the Free Chol Soo Lee movement was very much alive on the UCLA campus. One activist, Gary Edo, told us about the Kalbi Plate fundraisers he and other activists held on the Jan steps to raise money for Chol Soo's defense team. Or he'd go to KSA meetings trying to recruit supporters. There was even coverage of the Chol Soo Lee case in the campus Pacific Ties, which incidentally I used to edit when I was a student here. So it's just extra meaningful to have UCLA students today involved in the planning of this event, including Charlene Din, the daughter of a Free Chol Soo Lee activist, Grant Din, and it's wonderful to see that beautiful intergenerational hand-down and connection. So yes, we're so thrilled that we get to bring this history of Chol Soo Lee and this one-of-a-kind movement he inspired to new audiences and to a new generation. We know that more than 40 years ago, it inspired a whole generation of young college students like Mike Suzuki and young people like J. Lee Wong, and it made them feel like they could actually possibly do the impossible, that if they worked hard enough toward a collective action that was righteous, that they could actually accomplish their goals. We look forward to the intergenerational conversation with our panel after the screening, and we thank you so much for coming out tonight again. We hope this film and this story will move you as much as it does us. We'd also like to close just by relating some words of K.W. Lee, the journalist in the film. He's actually my mentor and the reason I became a journalist, and a very influential figure for Eugene as well. He's 94, going on 95 soon, and he very badly would love to join us for these screenings, but has been unable to. So we'd just like to communicate a few of his words. The undying moral lesson of this story boils down to universal human sentiments: love, courage, decency, fairness, that transcend birth, breed, creed, and borders, separating human beings from beasts. More than 40 years ago, some of the most beautiful people to walk this earth worked together to demonstrate the undying American proposition that the humblest among us are equal to kings, queens, and presidents. Thank you. We hope you enjoy the film.
Wow, thank you so much for that amazing film. Please join me in welcoming the panelists for tonight's event. First, our moderator, Charlene Tonai Din, is a third-year student at UCLA and serves as the external vice president for the Nikkei Student Union on campus. She grew up learning about Lee's story from her father, Grant Din, who was a member of the Bay Area Committee to Free Chol Soo Lee. Julie Ha is a storyteller whose career spans 20 years in journalism and more recently as a documentary filmmaker. A graduate of UCLA, she's written for the Hartford Courant, the Rafu Shimpo, and the LA Times, and has served as the editor for the Koream Journal, during which time she led award-winning coverage of the 20-year anniversary of the Los Angeles riots. Free Chol Soo Lee is her first documentary film project. Eugene Yee, yes. Eugene Yee, filmmaker, film editor, and journalist, has won several awards for his work. He's received the National Media Makers Fellows Award for the Bay Area Video Coalition for Free Chol Soo Lee. Yee served as assistant editor for Inside Job, which won the Academy Award for Best Documentary, and his web video work has been featured in numerous publications, including CNN, Frontline, and the New York Times. Eugene did not go to UCLA, but he is an Angelino. Welcome, Eugene. J. Lee Wong is a founding member of Chol Soo Lee Defense Committee, which built a national movement to educate and mobilize Korean and other communities about the criminal justice system that led to freedom of Chol Soo Lee. Jay is a lead consultant at the California Women's Foundation for California Women Rising, a statewide network of women and girl leaders from low-income communities engaged in social change. Jay previously worked at the California Endowment as director of Southern California region. Sorry, I realize this is making a lot of noise. I apologize. Mike Suzuki assisted the Chol Soo Lee legal defense team in the successful retrial of the 1973 San Francisco Chinatown homicide, ultimately leading to the freedom for Chol Soo Lee in 1983. Kirn Kim speaks as a former incarceree on issues of criminal and juvenile justice reform and the culture of shame and the model minority myth in the Asian Pacific Islander community. Kirn is active with the National Juvenile Justice Network and API Rise, Asian and Pacific Islander Reentry and Inclusion through support and empowerment. Thank you, Kirn, for joining us. And last but not least, Benjamin Kang is a senior at UCLA, a second-generation Korean American, and a 4-year staff member at UCLA CASA, which is the UCLA Korean American Student Association. Ben previously served as a representative for the UCLA Asian Pacific Coalition from 2020 to 2021, organizing fundraisers in the Koreatown Youth Community Center. This is our panel. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, May, and thank you all for being here. Just for the sake of time, I want to get straight into it. For our first question, I'm wondering if the directors, I know you've been traveling a lot, showing the film to different audiences. I'm wondering what the reaction has been, as well as if there's any memorable conversations or stories that have come out of that.
Yeah, we've been fortunate actually to be able to have shared this film for like a year and a half now. We had our Sundance premiere in January 2022, and the film's been on PBS right now too, so it's been really incredible. It's hard to narrow down all the responses. I think I'll say very generally that Chol Soo Lee is touching people today as he did more than 40 years ago. There's something about his honesty, his vulnerability, that innate friendliness that KW talks about, that is actually still reaching people in audiences today, whether it's in Germany or the UK, across the United States and Korea. His pain, his struggle, his resilience, it's coming through just as it did more than 40 years ago, and helped inspire a movement. I'll say, like, I think one of the most touching conversations that our film has sparked is the impact this film has had on those who are formerly incarcerated. We have been fortunate to have partnered with a couple of community organizations that support incarcerated and formerly incarcerated Asian American Pacific Islanders, including Kirn's group, API Rise, and a group called Asian Prisoner Support Committee. And I do remember, like, one screening we had in San Francisco last year. There was a member of the Asian Prisoner Support Committee in the audience, and after the film, he was just so overcome with emotion, he could barely talk, but he wanted to, he tried to express basically that what Chol Soo shared in the film and what his experience, he finally felt seen and heard. And we got a very similar kind of reaction from a young woman, a Korean American woman, who saw the film, and her brother was formerly incarcerated. And she just said she was so moved by it because she had never seen a Korean American story of somebody incarcerated like this, that showed just all of the humanity. And this issue is still actually stigmatized, I think, in our Asian American community. And so she also was so grateful that the experiences of her brother and also her family were expressed through this film. So I think that's been a really touching part of it.
And I'll just add that I think, as has been mentioned earlier, I mean, because the story was so little known, one of our real goals from the beginning was to get this history restored to our community, to just into the history books, and it's just with a tremendous sense of gratitude that for the last year and a half we've been able to share the film, we've been able to have this run that I mean, I don't think we really could ever have expected it to have, and we're just so hopeful that this is a step in the direction of this history being remembered, this history being put in the books, because we just feel so strongly that this is a history that deserves to be remembered and should be remembered, as well as the incredible people who were there, who freed Chol Soo Lee, and who made this history themselves.
Thank you, Eugene and Julie. And on that note of learning about the stories of those who were involved, I want to ask Jay and Mike both about that period of struggle that was highlighted in the film, what your reactions and thoughts were during that time where Chol Soo was dealing with gang involvement, drug abuse, as well as whether you have found peace with his story.
Sure. So first I want to thank Eugene and Julie for making this film. To be able to reflect back on 40 years in 83 minutes is huge. And for me, watching the film several times now, each time I watch it, I feel a sense of closure. And I think that's related to having peace. I was in my 20s, believe it or not, we're younger, a lot younger. When I first got involved in Chol Soo Lee movement, I read K.W. Lee's story and stayed up all night crying because I felt so strongly. It just really felt like my story, although I was on a different track. I went to work. I was working with Warren Frutani at the Continuation High School for Asian American youth who did not make it into the regular system, and shared the story with some of the youth. And Charlie Park was one of the young people that we worked with, said he's innocent. He didn't even read the story, but he said he's innocent, he was framed. And that night we actually piled into my little Toyota and drove up to DBI because we had to meet Chol Soo in person. When you're 20, you could drive all night and you'll be fine, So we did that. And just going to the prison and meeting Chol Soo in person was a huge, huge experience for all of us. and we all went in one at a time after the clearance. And one thing I remember, he was chain smoking, but his eyes were very clear, and he said, "I'm innocent," and we all believed that. So from that point on, we are very single focused on freeing Chol Soo, getting him out of jail. When I look back, there were many moments of sorrow. We made lots of mistakes, victories, shared joys, and then we also disagreed, But that's what it is to be building a movement. And so for a long time, I actually felt like I was carrying a lot of those very, very mixed emotions on my shoulder. And it was only after I saw this film, I felt this sense of pride, accomplishment, but also tremendous sadness. And also recognition that we have a lot more to do. But really, for the first time, I feel like I could just kind of drop my shoulder and feel that there is a sense of closure.
That's great. Thank you. For me, yes, I also have that sense of closure every time I've seen this film. I was a young student. I was at the other UC campus in the Bay Area, UC Berkeley, but I had many friends here at UCLA. There was many UCLA students who were also on the committee down here, but I was fortunate that as you saw, Dave Kakashiba and Jeff Adachi brought that to us. I was an Asian American Studies major. They had seen Chol Soo, told his story, and how could you not be involved? Yes, so I was at the hot link sales and the dance parties and the demonstrations at the courthouses, and I wanted to continue on. As you know, this spanned the course of 6 years, and so I wanted to continue to be involved. So I went to law school, like so many others. There were probably a dozen of us that ultimately went to law school because of our involvement in the Chol Soo Lee case. So I was fortunate that I was in my second year when the retrial was coming up, and so I was helping, Tony Serra and Stuart Hanlon and the other attorneys as well, including Ranko Yamada. Seeing seeing this film also brings to me, I guess, a perspective that we didn't have, because everybody, there was hundreds of people involved. Everybody had a different experience. My experience was focused more toward the legal case, and seeing the film brings up, actually surprises me again 40 years later, that how we could have accomplished that. Because yes, I've been a practicing lawyer for the past 35 years, and it still amazes me, and it reminds me today that what we did was actually the impossible, and I have not in my 35-year career seen anything like that since. So that is my impressions.
Thank you, Jay and Mike, and thank you for all your work all these past decades. One of the things that I talked about with my dad before preparing for this was the fact that Chol Soo really, his dream was to establish a organization like API Rise, which Kirn is a part of, that helps Asian Americans with the reentry process from incarceration. So as someone who's gone through that process, Kirn, I'm hoping you can share a little bit about what that was like for you personally, as well as your work with API Rise and other reentry programs, and the difference it has made in your life.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to thank Julie and Eugene again for making this film. First time I watched it was seeing the fact that you spent half the film talking about his struggle, Chol Soo's struggle with reentry. really touched my heart because that was so hard in dealing with me coming home. I earned my parole in 2012 prior to all of the reforms that happened in California, and they had no idea how to deal with lifer parolees. I was a juvenile sentenced as an adult to life in prison at age 16. I spent 20 years in prison, so I'm coming home at 36, still, with a lot of life left for my future. And at that time, people coming home were like in their 60s and 70s, expecting just to be on SSI and live the rest of their life, without being really able to accomplish much. But then there was no reentry support back then. They didn't know what to do with us because of the fact that, here I was 36 years old and still wanting to live my life. And so I thought I could go back and get support from the Asian community, but because of our issue with cultural shame, I found a lot of rejection. And no one really understood what I was going through. But I also did not have anyone outside of the Asian community who I could relate to because so few lifers had come home at that point. And so with all the pressure I was facing coming home from the Asian community to really keep quiet about my past, and even though I'd spent more than half my life in prison, I couldn't talk about it because people felt very uncomfortable hearing about that. And so I had to separate myself from the Asian community and really started working in the advocacy space with involving Latinx and African American communities. And later, as more people started coming home, as the reform started happening in California, more and more Asians were coming home. And the first group of Asians to come home also felt a lot of pressure to hide their past. And it wasn't until enough of us came home that we could build a support network and feel like have a legitimate community to find comfort with shared experiences, learn from our mistakes to make in the reentry process, ways to deal with all the cultural aspects of our community. But also we dealt with issues of deportation. Lots of Asian Pacific Islanders come to this country. They're either undocumented or they came as refugees, and their parents thought, because I'm a refugee, I have a special immigration status, I don't need to get my citizenship. Well, unfortunately, getting involved in criminal activity violates that contract, and you're facing deportation. So people who had lived here their entire lives, suddenly, because of the fact that their parents didn't get their American citizenship, suddenly were up for deportation. And even if they tried to apply for their citizenship as adults, it's like, well, you didn't register for the draft at 18, so you're kind of screwed right there. And so we really try to bring the community together, much like the Chol Soo Lee committee did for the trials. When people go through these deportation hearings at the immigration courts, resources and knowledge that we could all share. We bring that all together and we tie it together to a place like API Rise, so people can really understand, hey, there's people, there's resources, and we're all here to help you, and you don't have to feel alone. Because most people, I'm sure there are lots of people who went through deportation proceedings, involved in minor crime that didn't involve incarceration, but yet they had no idea what type of resources were available and struggled with their deportation hearings.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your story as well as the relevance to today. Building off of that, I'm wondering if you all could share how you feel that the film has extended or can continue to extend the legacy of Chol Soo Lee.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would hope our panelists will chime in here, but I think I think the part that always brings me to tears when I think about this story is just the depth of humanity and compassion that was shown by these activists, and the type of movement that they built and imagined, the type of social movement this country has never seen before. It wasn't just also young, radical college-age activists. It was also middle-aged Korean immigrants who actually started the movement. It was Korean immigrant elderly, including church-going grandmothers who were probably politically conservative, who joined this movement. That's a very unusual collection when you think about a social movement, but it makes you think about what's possible. And I think that's what we were hoping with this film. When people know this history, you think about what's possible. I think we're living also, in a time when it's so easy to feel very helpless and hopeless. Our community also is being ravaged by this incredible spike in anti-Asian violence. And we just have so many also pressing issues as a country, when it comes to criminal justice reform, school violence, so many issues. But we hope that also, when you see what these people did more than 40 years ago, you'll think, that it is possible. When people work together toward a righteous cause, it's hard, very hard work, right? But it is possible, and I think, I think that's a message that we really need to hear today.
I completely agree with what Julie just shared. I just want to emphasize that this is a history, but I'm hoping that the message that we could make change, that we are the ones who could really make change, is what's carried through. I am concerned about the times we live in, and these are challenging times. And each of the ethnic groups are being pitted against each other, gender orientation, sexual orientation, you name it. I mean, just very, very, very divisive times we live in. And I really hope that we did it, and we could continue to do it, and we have to do it, because we cannot stop organizing and building movements to change our lives, not just for ourselves, but for our children. And I'm so happy to see second generation activists here, who joined this panel. But just if anything, I plead with the audience here that, as we'll say in Spanish, si se puede, we could do it.
Ben, do you want to share as a young Korean?
So I actually, when I first heard about this film, I remember asking my mom, have you heard about this case? And she was very surprised that I knew about this case. And so I think it really speaks to how this film can connect the different generations. And kind of a quote from the film that I thought was really important was, "This wronging has been so wrong. What are you going to do about it?" I think it highlights the importance of these films, and that we need to keep raising awareness and getting more involved in these causes.
Thank you. Eugene, were you?
Oh, I mean, just to build on what's been said, I think, as Julie mentioned, it was not really kind of expected that people would come together like this. And I think, today Asian American is thought of as a demographic category, but back then, we were told by folks who were there, just not expected that Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, that folks would actually come together like this. But they did, and they overcame all of these barriers of just identity, of language, of generation, of politics, to find this common cause with Chol Soo Lee and build this solidarity. And this was, not long after just the idea of Asian America had been created. So they were kind of carving out this vision of what Asian America could be, this active and engaged community that has solidarity at its root. And I think there's just something that's so inspiring about that, to think about that for me as I think about Asian American identity, but also to sort of extend beyond the Asian American community, to sort of see where those common causes might be today, and what those other communities might be, where that common cause might be, where you can find those unlikely solidarities and just sort of build on this idea. So I mean, again, thank you so much for just everything that you all have done and everything that you all are doing today.
Thank you. And I think this is a time for a few questions from the audience. Please raise your hand. Yes, and I think we have runners with mics.
Hi, I have a question for the filmmakers. One of the things I most appreciate about the film, and I haven't heard about the story before I saw this film, but one of the things that stood out to me was sort of how complete the story was, and how rich and how many perspectives were in it, and how he really went from the beginning of his life to the end of his life with a lot of detail. And one of the things I was wondering, as a filmmaker who had to sort of condense this decades-long story into this hour and 20-minute film, is there anything that you had to cut or had to leave out, or anything in the story that we didn't see that you'd want to talk about, or sort of the decision process behind that? Because I know that's one of the hardest parts of really doing that sort of thing.
We really don't have enough time for that.
Yeah, now how long you got?
There's just so much. We did like days-long interviews with these activists, and you just see tiny snippets of them. We were just joking about that before the screening, and really incredible interviews. Actually, they said the most amazing things. So, I think I just want to answer your question this way, though. It did take us 6 long years. With an incredible team who helped us form this story, this 83-minute story. And I have to say that, I know I felt like maybe I would never be at peace with how the film turned out, because it seemed too big. And how are we going to get it right? But when we did see the final cut, I had an incredible sense of peace. While we worked on this film, it's a very personal project for us. I used to ask Chol Soo Lee, he was no longer with us, but what do you want us to say? What do you want to say in this film? What do you want to tell people? What do you want to tell all the people who rallied to your side? What message do you want to give to them? And so, thanks to the people who lived the story and who knew Chol Soo, sharing so honestly with us, sharing their truth through everything Chol Soo left behind in his writings and his interviews and his speeches and his intimate phone conversations with K.W. Lee. We really tried so hard to really get his truth across in this film. So I don't want to entertain maybe too many ideas what we don't have in it. And I just want to also point out our narrator, Sebastian Yoon, whose voice you hear in the first 2/3 of the film. I would say he's actually formerly incarcerated Korean American, and he was the discovery of our producer, Soo Kim. We really felt like once he joined our film team, and he actually helped us script the scenes for what Chol Soo says in our film, and really helped us understand the experience of being incarcerated, and that it was mentally a very lonely, isolating, depressing experience, and not just prison violence that Chol Soo was confronting. So much fell into place for us in terms of feeling like we were getting closer to Chol Soo's truth. But yeah, I'm sorry I didn't really answer your question.
We have time for one more question from the audience. 2 more.
Sorry. One of the scenes that really stuck with me in the film was when Chol Soo is having his first talk at UC Davis, and he's basically talking about the dissolution of his humanity in prison, as well as the sort of outrage that was happening during his funeral. And to me, I sort of read that as a call for abolitionism, where this is a very inhumane and irreparative system that's supposed to be punitive, and that makes it really hard to facilitate re-entry into society. And I was sort of wondering what sort of conversations any of you were hoping that this film would generate in terms of abolitionism or even in terms of broader topics like coalitional politics and the different ways that, or different directions you want activism to go next?
Abolitionism is a little bit of a heavy topic because that term has been very much misinterpreted in the social justice movement. Yes, the whole incarceral system is horrible. Mass incarceration was built on racism, was built as a way to get around Jim Crow after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, which is why the minority population are so much more heavily affected by the prison system. So yes, that type of racist, systemic racism needs to be abolished. However, the issue with that the movement pushes today, it's forgetting about the people who are already caught up in the system. There have been some organizations who have been criticized for having contracts with probation or the sheriff's department because they're all like, oh, you're working with the man, how can we trust you? The problem is, how can you have access to help the people inside unless you have contracts with the sheriff's department who runs the county jails, or probation who runs the juvenile halls, or the prison system? So what we're seeing today in California, when Governor Newsom announced the closure of the Department of Juvenile Justice, which is the state youth prison system, we're seeing the problem now is there was no preparation done on what to do with these kids. So yes, you're abolishing this racist, horrible, and unjust system, but then now people don't know what to do with the kids who are already there. Thankfully, judges are just like, well, let them out. Incarcerating kids is wrong. They should be getting treatment. So letting the kids out, I think, was a good practice run. But there needs to be a better implementation on what has been deemed abolition. And there needs to be less conflict between those who are for purely abolition versus those who see reform as the better way to go. Because I'll be honest, I saw some very dangerous people inside. People I would not trust to live a mile away from me, 10 miles away. People I would not want out in society. Yes, the system broke them. And it is sad to say they are too far broken to be healed in a proper manner. And the system that Chol Soo talked about is what broke them. But it's unfortunate to say, but I would not feel safe having some of them out. I mean, it's a messed up thing for me to talk about openly, but I'm just being honest. And I don't know, Mike, do you have something to add about the juveniles?
It really is an eternal question, right? I mean, yes, Governor Newsom is disbanding the juvenile state prisons. However, where are they going to go? In fact, right now we're in a crisis situation with our juvenile system and the state authorities overseeing the juvenile facilities want to close them down. So not only are we supposed to take care of those actually what would be considered the toughest juvenile involved members, we still can't deal with the people that are on the local level, and there's been no question. There's no answers at this point in time.
Our community, as much as the community is the best place for them to get the help that they need, a community doesn't really know how to deal with this. I mean, they didn't know how to deal with lifers coming home in 2012, 2013. It took us to really fight to get people to understand what it was that we needed after having spent decades in prison, But unfortunately for kids, they are children. And yes, they are 16, 17, 18, but they are still developmentally immature. They don't know how to communicate their needs properly. And as much as our heart's in the right place and wanting to get them the proper treatment that they need and the help that they can get, they don't know how to tell us what they need. And so that's what we're going to be dealing with here in California for a good 10 to 15 years now.
One more question from the audience?
If not, I have a follow-up. I'm just curious, what organizations are doing that kind of work right now, like, or are trying to move into that space? Because I feel like so much of the conversation, and I'm sorry, if someone has a question, please raise your hand. This is just heard, but so much of the tragedy of what happened after Chol Soo was released was this gap in terms of what institutional support was available versus what people as individuals were able to do. And that's one thing that we didn't get into in the film, but so many of the activists who are part of the movement just worked so hard to try and get Chol Soo going. You know, got him a bank account, got him jobs, got him housing, just sort of we're sort of trying to sort of help him through his addiction. There's just so much work that was done. But yeah, I guess if you all could speak with your expertise or your lived experience on where those gaps are now and who's working to fill those gaps.
I can't name like just any one or two organizations. There are so many different organizations out there. I mean, early on, the only work was being done by like Homeboy Industries near Chinatown, you know, because Father Greg Boyle really believed in the work. But in the last, I want to say 8 years, there's been an explosion of organizations. So it's wrong for me to just name a handful because, I mean, honestly, I've been out of the general reentry movement. I've focused a lot on Asian Pacific Islander reentry since the creation of API Rise. So it's hard for me to name one. I mean, the first group that I got involved with was the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, based in LA. But we have Inside Out Riders, we have Impact Justice, we have Mass Liberation. There's so many different organizations that I could name, and so many that I can't name. But the big struggle the big question that people have is, you know, when someone comes home and they struggle, the question is like, dude, you're not in prison anymore. Why are you struggling? And it's not just a matter of not being in prison, not having the four walls around you. It's getting help for all the issues that led you to get into prison in the first place and dealing with the traumas you experienced while inside. The funny thing is, this movie comes out at a time when we all were incarcerated for 2 years. And how many of you either experienced or heard on social media people saying, "Oh my God, I feel this anxiety going outside again." And then it was funny because I'm in these Zoom meetings saying, "Gee, for all you who told me that, why are you struggling with reentry? Are you struggling with reentry all of a sudden?" And so, but we all have this shared community on which to build support for each other. But imagine what it was like for Chol Soo back at the peak of the buildup of mass incarceration, for him to come home during this time of Just Say No and the drug war and everything else that was going on, and people just expecting him to do fine. What's wrong? You're out of prison. Why are you feeling pressure? And even when I came home, no other lifers were home. And talking to my friends inside, didn't understand, and they were like, "Man, you're not in prison anymore. Why are you struggling? Why do you feel stress?" So it's just finding the space to help people build community, finding support where they need it, not feeling the rejection from, especially in the Asian community, because of the fact that we feel this cultural shame. I mean, the same people who say, you know, fuck the model minority myth, but yet you come across someone who's formerly incarcerated, and then suddenly it's all like, "Oh yeah, don't talk to him because he makes us look bad." So then, are you against the model minority myth, or aren't you? You know, so it's this double-edged sword that's really, it's so frustrating. And but shouldn't be just the organizations that do the work. You know, it should be all of us, because we are one community. You know, the whole Confucian way of thinking. We're cogs in the machine, but yet if you hide the cogs that are cracked, the machine's still going to break. That just because everything looks shiny doesn't mean it's going to work well. So we as a community should really work together to find and help people coming home, trying to rebuild their lives, find acceptance, find community, and find help and support. Because you're only hurting yourself if you're rejecting these parts of our community.
Thank you. And on that note of looking forward and working towards the future we want to build, I want to raise a question that an environmental justice advocate that I really look up to, Leah Thomas, poses to her panelists. It's because in these activist spaces we're talking about deconstructing, dismantling so many systems, which is so important, and we should be able to understand those systems in order to take them down. But it's also important to think about the world that we wish to live in. What world do we want to radically imagine? And so as a concluding question, I wanted to ask the panelists, in your spaces, in your spheres, in your personal life, in any aspect that you would like to share, what does a radically imagined future look like?
I think I already answered that question with my last statement, but I want to close with this. I get asked a lot, what does a successful reentry look like? And my answer to that is the most successful reentry is the one you don't hear about, because someone was so well integrated back into society that you never even realized what they had gone through. So not everyone coming home wants to be an activist, wants to be this rock star. Clearly Chol Soo didn't want to do that. And he felt a lot of pressure in dealing with it. He just wanted to be a regular person, having a regular job and living a quiet life. But the pressure that was put upon him was so much that he couldn't deal with it, and it sent him back to his old ways. So, just help people be regular members of society.
I'll just add, I think, one of the lines in the film that I think has always been very resonant and meaningful for me is that part where Chol Soo is almost sort of, it's almost like a confessional. It's sort of his interview that he does after his accident, and he talks about the pain that he's been through in his life. But sort of how meeting KW Lee and through meeting the activists, sort of there was this humanity that was extended towards him. And that inspired him to want to sort of grow his humanity and to give that to others. And there's just something, I think, there are many different takeaways from the film, but in the edit, we would sometimes I would sometimes refer to that as the thesis statement to the film. And again, there are many messages in this film, but it's just something that really resonated with me, because so much sort of that empathy can come from an understanding of pain and can be the root of that. And films are often referred to as sort of these machines for empathy, and I think, at least in this example of the life of Chol Soo and all that he went through, just that comes to me, and it just sort of makes me want to sort of use that in my life and hope to build towards a world where the systems might reflect an understanding that's built on understanding and empathy and a way of connecting in that way, and a way of making meaning together in that way, because that just sort of seems like that's at the root of any movement, of any action to try and push the world in a direction that we all feel is a better direction.
I also want to remind everybody that, Chol Soo Lee actually, as he says by his own admission, was no angel. He was no model minority, even prior to his arrest and wrongful conviction. He in fact had a criminal record, was sort of this poor Korean immigrant street kid. And I think, we have to remember that when people rallied around him, he was that person. And they still looked upon him at a time when the rest of society was saying, you're disposable, They were actually saying, no, you actually are worthy of our time, attention, love, and care. You're worthy of a landmark movement. And I think that's something I try to remember and I try to personalize. And I always encourage everyone, like, really personalize the message of this film in your own lives. You know, I hope you allow it to move you. Maybe it'll change your perspective on certain issues. Maybe it'll make you think that there's some issues that you didn't realize were your issues too. You know, if it changes the way maybe you think about raising your own children and the principles and values with which you do that, how you vote, the causes you support. You know, that's how I'm also trying to challenge myself whenever I think about the messages of this film.
When I think of Chol Soo's life, his life is a reflection of his history and the context. He was born during Korean War. He carries the birthday of Korean Independence Day that has always stuck in my mind, and how much of his life is that of a victim, in a way, of the history of Korea and the immigration to this country. And yet there is a lot of resilience and strength and love and passion that he had. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about being able to name intergenerational trauma and to be able to really sit with it and reflect on it. And I think that only when we could name it, not just individually, but collectively, that there is a compassion that comes out of it that is from a very deep place. So the world I would like to see is where we are allowed and have given that opportunity to be able to reflect on who we are and why we are here, and be able to tell our story from a point of strength and of that of liberation. And then I think we could talk about collective change that is much deeper than just one cause or one issue. So that's the word I would like to see.
I don't know how you can follow up with that, but what I can say is that maybe perhaps I'm a bit more pessimistic. I don't see radical change coming anytime soon. However, I believe that without personal involvement, and that's you guys becoming involved, it's great sitting here, it's great watching these films, but if you walk out and do nothing from after today, then I don't consider that a success. I think people need to be involved. Not that there is a dearth of issues, there are tons of issues, whatever you want to be involved with, but you need to be involved, you need to be active, you need to speak out for those who can't speak for themselves. You need to be involved with organizations like we have here with Kirn. That I see is a step toward a brave new world, yes.
So in an ideal world, you know, we could just snap our fingers and get rid of the racism, the prejudices that have unfortunately kind of leaked into our institutions. But I think the most important thing is that we're not afraid of systemic change, trying to progress forward, but remembering the grievances of our past. A history teacher in high school told me history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I think what he wanted to say is that even if it does seem like the same thing may be occurring, we're in a greater time where we now have more power to prevent the same mistakes from happening. So I think as long as we're not closing the door on change and making sure that we're creating these safe spaces for these difficult conversations to occur, then I think we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you so much. And I feel like just having this conversation with you all is a part of the future that I want to live in. So that concludes our panel discussion and program. Before you all leave, I just want to let you know that this film is screening on PBS's Independent Lens until May 23rd. So if you have friends who couldn't make it and wanted to come, please share with them. It should be available on YouTube and PBS, right?
Yeah, yes, and on the PBS app until actually July 22nd. So please spread the word. Also, if you have any people in your lives who are Korean language speakers, on YouTube and on the PBS app, it is available with Korean subtitles as well. So please let folks know.
And if you're interested in supporting API Rise, our website is www.api-rise.org.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming on this Saturday night. Please get home safe and take care.